Oh shit, I need the script.
Multiverse of Marvel. 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 Multiverse of Marvel.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Multiverse of Marvel podcast, where each week our resident Marvel guys, Aaron and Dan Gridley, will dive into a crazy corner of the ever-expanding Marvel multiverse to see which topic we'll be discussing this week. Welcome, guys, and I think with this week we decided on Morbius.
Yeah, doesn't that open this weekend?
Yeah, it comes out. It opens on the first. Yeah,
Friday.
but because now they don't do the midnight screenings, they actually do it on like the Thursdays. Yeah, like they do like the premieres on the Wednesdays. And because I have a ticket actually for 4:10 tomorrow at the Scotiabank.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, which will be probably either I'm probably going to try and get this out either tonight or tomorrow. So if this is tomorrow, it's be today for people listening
Nice.
at 4:10. So like right after work, I like got off at 3.
Hey, you
come
head
home.
straight down there?
Yeah, I'll get home just after 3. I'll do that and just be able to walk down because Scotiabank Theater is like literally like a block and a half away, or maybe a block. Yeah, I'll dox myself. I don't care. I live like right downtown Toronto, so it's like
It sounds like you don't live too far from my brother-in-law.
So like what I knew like that theater was close like when I moved here, but like I went to go with I think it was when Spider-Man, like when the theaters opened up in the November or whenever it was, I went to go ride my bike and I was like, oh shit, I didn't think it was this fucking close.
Nice.
Because I knew because Much Music's like right around the corner
Yep,
there.
right up the street. Yep.
Yeah, and then I used to work. I worked there for a summer like 10 years ago. Yeah, so that was kind of
nice.
rad. So it would have been good if I was working there
Back
now.
when
Yeah.
it
And you're right by
almost
Silver Snail.
mattered.
Because it would have been good because the Silver Snail was like right there, but actually the building's not even there anymore.
Well, yeah, but you know what? The new Silver Snail is just down a little further, right?
So it's like 4 or 5 stops, I think. Yeah, so just go there on the side of Spadina. Actually, it's fairly close to where I used to live. Yeah, last time I lived in Toronto a few years ago at Bathurst and Bathurst and Adelaide. So I'm glad I don't live there anymore because I would just be going there all the time, spending all my money.
Yeah, true enough. I might be going down Sunday, so I might be wandering in there and spending a bit of money.
Oh, figures. I work at midnights on Sunday, so I'll be.
Yeah. No, we're thinking of heading down on Sunday and hit up the aquarium and a few other things.
Oh, nice. So, yeah, I think I'll be hitting it.
Since my birthday's Saturday, I figure I might as well go to Silver Snail and get something, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They actually, I think they still have a copy of the Amazing Spider-Man number 61 up on the wall.
Oh wow.
But it doesn't seem to be in the best of shape, so I think that's why it's still there. But I bet I've just been looking at it from the floor because I don't want to grab it, because if I grab it and touch it, I'll buy it.
Fair enough.
It's tragic how that happens sometimes.
Yeah. So.
But going to see Morbius in theaters. I don't know about it. How successful it'll be.
Yeah. So
as far as being a spin-off of Spider-Man, this one works as a movie independent of Spider-Man because Morbius, his origin has jack shit to do with Spider-Man.
Yeah, so what was his origin in the books?
Pretty much the same as what they're showing here in the trailers for the movie and what was depicted in the cartoon back in the 90s.
He's
he
going
was
for
dying.
plasma.
Well, let's get that out of the way right away.
I know. I was thinking about that all day. I was like, I knew like all of
the
us would be
true
doing
tragedies of the character, especially considering that the character originally comes out of all the censorship rules being relaxed in Marvel back in the 70s.
It's another one of those stupid 90s censorship where it's like, okay, so at the time we just thought it was stupid. Now that I'm older, I understand, okay, plasma is a part of blood.
Yeah.
So he's still going after blood. So what
You
the
didn't
hell?
know that back then?
I
You
was
didn't know that
like
when we
8
were
or 9 at
kids?
the time. I was like
Yeah,
8 or
like-
9, Aaron.
I was a year older, and I knew that plasma was a part
I
of
was like,
blood.
I'm
Doesn't
fairly
matter.
certain that's what they're doing. Yeah, but I'm
But
like,
yeah,
sometimes I'm dumb, but I'm like, I'm fairly certain that's what that means.
But
Yeah,
it's
no,
the
it
same. It's the same
was-
as like, how they didn't let them have actual guns. They were laser guns. And it's like,
Yeah.
but the effect is still the same thing. It's
Yeah.
still shot at people to kill them. What's the point of the censorship?
No, I just find it ironic that okay, censorship's been lifted. What can we do? Let's have a vampire. And then 20 years later, hey, we're doing Spider-Man cartoon. Let's put Morbius in it. We can't have a vampire. How do we censor this character? But in pretty much all depictions, Michael Morbius was born or afflicted at some point in his life with a terminal blood disease.
Yeah.
Exceptionally rare one. He's one of the few people to have lived as long as he did with said disease.
Yeah.
Being a brilliant biochemist and a fairly unorthodox mad scientist type.
And did he become the expert in all this stuff to cure himself, or just coincidentally, or is it implied, or does
brilliant mind, regardless of any of it, happened to be applied towards the problem that he uniquely suffers.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an expert in most biology.
You see, I was super smart, then
just his
focused
own.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, like as we get through his history, you'll see that there's a few impressive things he's done that you wouldn't expect. He's kind of like Magneto in the sense that you look at him and you see one thing, but when you dig deep, you're like, oh wow, this guy can do this, and this, and they don't really have much to do with his powers. Oh, wow. Yeah, no, Morbius, he the exact nature of what he does to try to cure his powers varies, but usually it involves vampire bats. And whatever serum he concocts to help cure his blood disease ends up turning him into a scientific pseudo vampire.
Yes, because that line for the movie, it says, yeah, I got here. It's that biochemist Michael Morbius tries to cure himself of rare blood disease, but inadvertently infects himself with a form of vampirism instead.
Yep. Not sure to what degree his power set will extend to in the movie, but originally in the comics, his physiology was altered so that his muscles were lighter, and that specifically his bones were hollow, and this somehow allowed for him to fly. It was elaborated on later on to include some sort of psionic ability, but yeah, he flies because he's super light, and
It looks like in one of the trailers he might turn to mist.
I was kind of thinking that they might include some of his Lilin spawned abilities from the 90s, which we'll get to.
But I think they're just going with that instead of just having him doing the land bones flying sort of thing.
Oh yeah, no, I don't think that he will literally be part Lilin in it. I think
no, of course not. Of course not. They're not going to get into that.
Adapt it for it because it honestly makes more sense. Some of what he could do in the 90s was actually pretty cool. But in the 70s, when he first appeared, it was limited to flight, super strength, the need for to suck blood, and he could function during the day, but he became extremely lethargic and weak.
So he's only like a morning walker instead of a day walker.
A little bit, yeah. In fact, his pseudo vampiric status does lend him to be a bit of the yin to Blade's yang. There is often a rivalry between them, neither of them being true vampires in any sense. In fact, it was exposure to Morbius's vampiric enzymes that turned Blade into the cinematic daywalker that he was known as. A lot of the need for blood and all the extra vampire abilities, Blade didn't have those abilities originally. His only real super ability originally was immunity to vampire bites. But as we've said, Morbius isn't a real vampire. His first appearance would be back in Spider-Man 101, the second part of the classic six-armed Spider-Man story.
Oh, yeah.
So you probably remember a bit of that from the cartoon.
Yeah,
same sort of thing. He wants to rid himself of his powers. He's been
that's
thinking
where they
about
bring
it for a
in
while.
Punisher as well, and that's a little.
In the cartoon, but it doesn't happen in the comics for a couple
a while.
more
So
year and a
Yeah,
half or 2.5 years, I think. It was
yeah,
what,
yeah, because he still shows up in Spider-Man.
29,
So
something like that was
yeah,
his
something like
first
that.
appearance.
Yeah, I know. And
Anyway,
I know it's always funny that I learned that from Coyote Ugly,
I
and that wasn't the line that stayed in from when Kevin Smith did a draft of it.
but yeah, no, Blade or Morbius is quite a bit earlier than that, at least a year and a 2.5 years earlier.
Yeah,
Um, so the start of the story is Peter wanting to be rid of his arms, takes this serum that he's concocted himself.
You have made it
Uh,
clear that Peter had extra arms, not just his regular arms, but the extra
yeah,
arms he had
the
grow.
6-arm Spider-Man
yeah,
story. So
yeah.
he takes this serum, has wild hallucinations in his sleep, and all the while, oh, my sides just keep aching and aching. I've never experienced a pain like this. And he wakes up and he's got 4 additional arms down his sides,
Are they
and he freaks out even
are
more.
they human arms or like spider arms?
They are human arms.
Okay.
Remember, it was like that in the cartoon.
Okay,
How,
yeah, so,
he in his costume, he had like the upper 2 arms were like in his costume, but
yeah,
then
the
like the
other,
next 2 were like bare.
yeah,
Um, so he, after kind of figuring out, okay, I got to deal with this, he gets a hold of Dr. Kurt Connors, the lizard,
yeah.
knowing that, okay, this is a guy who's got the know-how to help out. I'm not going to anybody, but I'll talk to him and see if he's got any advice. And the guy's like, oh, well, my beach house down the coast here, it's got a fully stocked lab. You've helped me before. You head down there, you get started. I'll meet up with you when I can. But yeah, that's the place you want to be. So Peter hops a train on the exterior, not the interior, obviously. He's very, very, very self-conscious about these additional
Weirdly
arms.
enough, I did imagine him just like sitting down on the train and like just sitting there,
Just
like
shrugging
6
it
arms.
off as
Yeah,
Spider-Man.
yeah, just like hey people, how's it going?
But no, this is really getting to him because he's had to make it seem like he's breaking up with I think it's Gwen he's still dating at this point.
At the comics, I believe it was still going at that point.
Oh, Gwen's still alive at this point. Okay.
Yeah, this is still pretty early.
Yeah, no, I never actually would know what number did she die? Do you know?
It's again, it's another couple of years. I think it's before Punisher, but definitely sometime after this. Yeah, he's making it seem like he's disinterested in a relationship with her because he's so, caught up in the Spider-Man crap. And then he decides, no more Spider-Man. But anyways, he's back at the mansion that the lizard or Kurt Connors has. He's making progress, but unbeknownst to him, Morbius is just napping upstairs in the attic. Not too
as he does.
Well, not too prior to this, he was off on the other side of the world, somewhere in Europe, doing his bit to try to cure his situation.
Oh, trying to go to like
And-
Transylvania and go about like the beginning
no,
of vampires.
No,
or
he's Greek.
okay.
Yeah, so he is from Europe. But his lab was set up on like a big like freighter or yacht or some giant ship. He was out at sea.
Okay.
But the experiment goes awry. He has these vampiric urges. He also tends to go crazy when he has the thirst. He doesn't really have the ability to control himself. He's more or less a metaphor for addiction. Like he really cannot control who he attacks when he is afflicted by his vampiric thirst, and has been known to drain both friend and foe. There have been adventures where he has gone to great lengths to save somebody, only to have his own thirst betray him at the end and force him to then kill that person for their blood.
A nice friend.
He's kind of tragic. It's no surprise that when he meets the 90s Ghost Rider for the first time and is subjected to the penance stare, it doesn't actually do anything to him. His response to Ghost Rider is like, you haven't shown me anything that I don't already know. Like he is very much aware of all of the pain and misery that his existence has caused, and he is always trying to find a cure. He's another example of the sort of villain that kind of brings out the worst in Spider-Man. Much like how when Spider-Man, up until his time with the Avengers, when Spider-Man would encounter somebody like Wolverine, Wolverine's killer instinct would really unnerve Spider-Man and throw him off his game. When he encounters somebody like Ghost Rider, he always tends to assume the worst, and that Ghost Rider is going to be some destructive monster that will kill people. And when it comes to guys like Morbius, he always just assumes the worst. And again, when he could help, as we've seen the way the Tom Holland Spider-Man in the movies thinks, if the 616 Spider-Man had that mentality, there'd be a lot fewer problems in his life in the comics.
That's very true.
If he actually took the time to stop quipping with most of his villains and be like Squirrel Girl and actually talk to them and figure out, what's your game here? Why are you doing this? What are you trying to accomplish? And a lot of time you find out, oh yeah, I'm afflicted by this problem and I need to do something to correct it. We saw how well that worked in the movies. I kind of wish the comics was a little bit like that. But anyways, the situation back at the beach house gets exacerbated when the Lizard shows up. And, well, sorry, not the Lizard, Kurt Connors. He's there to help. But when Morbius wakes up I skipped a bit. Yeah, sorry, Morbius was back on his boat. The experiment went awry. He caused problems. He jumps ship because, again, crazy.
As you do.
He jumps ship, is adrift, gets almost immediately picked up by another ship, this one on its way to America. And he does the literary Dracula thing and just starts picking off the crew, man after man after man, until there's just a handful left panicking at the thought that
that'd be terrifying, because you can't really do anything, because you jump off board, you die, or just for somebody else. What? Take him next.
The voyage of the Demeter again. Demeter. I'm thinking of different ways I've heard it pronounced. Words.
I don't know.
The ship from Dracula.
Right, yes.
But the ship, it doesn't crash where the boathouse or the shore house, beach house is. Morbius once again jumps ship because crazy, and washes up at the shore of the beach house. And that's when he decides, all right, I'm just going to chill here for the day. But wakes up after Dr. Kurt Connors shows up, and the stress of the conflict, of course, makes Kurt Connors lizard out, and the lizard of course hates Spider-Man, so he doesn't care that there's this weirdo vampire attacking Spider-Man. Spider-Man's lizard's enemy. He's got to kill Spider-Man.
He's mine.
Morbius's perspective on this is, I don't care who I bite. I gotta bite somebody because I just woke up and I'm hungry. My stomach is just gnawing at me, and a bagel's just not going to cut it. So he's like, you want to attack Spider-Man? Fine, I'll just bite you. And he bites the lizard. And Spider-Man, recovering, saying, hey, Kurt Connors is my friend, so technically the lizard's my friend. Get off my friend. And he knocks.
That's my half friend.
Well, the funny thing is once he knocks Morbius aside, the lizard pops up and he's got the consciousness of Dr. Kurt Connors. Something about Morbius's bite has kind of reversed part of the lizard transformation. So after Morbius flees, Spider-Man and Lizard talk things out and figure out, okay, we got to get a hold of this Morbius guy. There's something special about his blood. After chasing him down, doing a bunch of science stuff, Lizard finally figures out, okay, we're looking for something in his blood. It's not in his blood, it's in his saliva. He bit me. Of course it's like that. Why are we being stupid? And they figure out there's something in his saliva that allows them to turn the lizard back into Kurt Connors and get rid of Spider-Man's 4 limbs, But wouldn't you know it, they have a misunderstanding because they don't really ever talk things out with Morbius, or he's going crazy because blood. And he takes off into the night, and he's
Never
just
to be
gone.
seen again.
But this opens the door for Stanley to be like, all right, so we just had our first vampire. I think things went well. Let's open the floodgates. Let's get Dracula. Let's get a werewolf. Let's get a flaming biker. Let's do a daughter of Dracula. I always wanted to do a Devil's Daughter comic. Let's get that. She needs a brother. Let's introduce her brother first.
Cousin of Frankenstein.
Yeah, well, we got Frankenstein. We got to have him in it. He's public domain. We can't have Dracula versus Frankenstein without Frankenstein and Dracula. So, the Morbius.
So werewolves in the mix. Hey, why not even a living mummy and a zombie?
Yeah.
Oh, I got zombies.
The Marvel zombie, Simon Garth. That's a good one. But yeah, it's Morbius opens the floodgates for all kinds of stuff to happen. Over the next little while, he just pretty much floats around as an occasional villain. He shows up in a couple of issues of Marvel Team Up. Think giant-sized superheroes. But towards the end of the 70s, he ends up taking over the recently vacated Adventures into Fear. At first, Fear had been a reprint series until issue 10.
And what were they reprinting?
Just different 50s and early 60s horror anthology stories that had been published by Marvel. Marvel's got tons of all kinds of old horror stuff that, there's some debate whether or not it is part of the Marvel universe. The amount of stories that were just part of these like weird horror books, stuff comparable to Tales from the Crypt. But there's a number of them that have been referenced later on in Marvel continuity to lead enough credence that there's some scary shit going on in the Marvel universe before all the superheroes showed up.
in the corners, yeah.
Like if you take all that into account, superheroes are definitely a positive influence in the Marvel universe, because previously all kinds of horrors of the night existed. Like the SCP Foundation's got nothing on what Marvel had to deal with before superheroes. No, craziness then, craziness now, craziness to come. So Fear, after the reprints, became the Man-Thing's title. Man-Thing ran from 10 to 19. 19 gives us Howard the Duck. That story spins right off into Man-Thing. He gets
Howard
his own.
the Duck.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck those.
We'll cover Howard at some point.
Yeah.
He's worth it.
It was you guys' stance on the movie.
I enjoy it. There's a couple of questionable things about it. Nipples on a duck.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say,
I have.
I legitimately forgot about that. I've seen it in the last 2 years, and I legitimately forgot about that. It caught me off guard.
It's not the Steve Gerber Howard the Duck. It's very much the Marvel Edict, Bill Mantlo written Howard the Duck. Uses Duck World and kind of takes a lot of the.
That's because that's where they show that that's where
Howard's a bit more of a cliche in the movie than a cipher as he is in the comics. He's very much a vehicle for Steve Gerber's voice in the comic, and Gerber's got a lot to say. And then after Gerber leaves, Howard becomes just kind of a commodity. But we'll get into Howard at another time. He's well worth it. But once that stuff heads off in its own direction, Fear is left. All right, we need something now. Morbius is given that as his title, Adventures into Fear, starring Morbius. He gets to be the star of that title from there until the end of the run, issues 20 to 31. And on top of being the star of that 4-color comic, he was the headliner for the black and white Vampire Tales magazine. I have one issue of Vampire Tales, and it just happens to be the Lilith issue, not any of the multiple Morbius issues. So I'm very grateful to have Lilith, daughter of Dracula, but I have always wanted to experience the Morbius stories in Vampire Tales because I honestly have no idea what goes on in them. Like, I know for the first half of or the first third at least of the Fear series, there's a conflict between Blade and Morbius, and I've got a reprint and a few issues from the end of the series, and it's some weird extra dimensional adventure where there's this big kaiju sized demon that's just covered in eyeballs, like right down to his fingernails being covered in eyeballs. And if I do recall, though, Maritime Bancroft shows up towards the end of that series. She is the love of Morbius's life. She is the girlfriend who he jumped off of the ship to avoid devouring. He's bitten her once or twice, and some writers have flip-flopped back and forth over whether this can happen or not, but sometimes if Morbius bites a victim, they become infected with a lesser strain of his disease, and they can be cured through a serum made from his blood. But as to whether or not this actually happens, whether or not he's aware of this can vary decade to decade. From what I've seen, this was brought to his attention like way back in stories in the 70s, like in the Adventures into Fear stuff. But I seem to recall reading stories in the 90s where like it's this big shock that like, oh my God, there's victims of his that have, they've risen up as vampires and they've created even more victims. It's a domino effect. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I'll just chalk it up to frequent bouts with insanity causing memory loss.
It's known to happen.
I got no better explanation for that.
Or amnesia.
I don't think there's any
much
outright amnesia, but there have been times where Morbius has been left in pretty destitute circumstances. Like right before his revival in the 90s, like he was left like, hiding out in the sewers. This is not normal for him.
Hanging out with the Morlocks.
I think they're all dead by that point.
No, he not.
Oh yeah, that's right. I keep on forgetting that. Yeah, fuck.
Yeah. When he hangs out in the sewers much later, it's during Norman Osborn's reign, and there's like a whole community of monsters living in the former Morlock tunnels.
That and from based on especially a book that I just read, the underground in New York is massive.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'd imagine it would be.
Yeah.
Or it's
you have no idea.
30 stories.
Or like I always think of it as like old New York from like Futurama, where it's just like a city built on another like old.
No, more like
kind of like that though.
More like deliberately building parts of a city underground for the elite to use, and then never having any reason or opportunity to use it.
Like there is one spot where it literally does go 30 stories underground.
I went down it, yeah, because even the south building in the convention center is like 4 or 5 floors out. Yeah, there.
Toronto gets pretty deep in some spots, right?
Yeah, I've seen some of those foundation digs. That
they go.
Oh
deep.
yeah,
that's almost vertigo-inducing looking down.
Yeah.
But as we go through the Morbius chronology, there, Vampire Tales. None of the Marvel magazines tend to last anything longer than like a dozen or so issues. I think Vampire Tales only lasted like 11, but Morbius was the star of most of those issues, featuring lots of other vampire stories too. Some dealing with recurring characters like Blade or the previously mentioned Lilith Dracula's daughter. There's 2 Liliths in Marvel. There's the Ghost Rider villain, and then there's the Dracula daughter. Dracula's daughter is sometimes a good guy, but not often.
The other one's always bad.
When she decides to be?
I think during the Vampire Tales stuff, she's not a normal vampire, but she's still a magic one. She was possessing the body of some teenage girl or something, and innate goodness of that girl was making Lilith do heroic type stuff. You got to have a reason to root for the bad guys sometimes.
Of course.
But after the seriousness of Vampire Tales, we get one of the goofier stories. Marvel Premiere 28, The Legion of Monsters. I mean, it's a pretty cool title for a story. I mean, Legion of Monsters. How do you get better than that? But the actual story is you got Man-Thing, Ghost Rider, the werewolf, and Morbius all being teleported to one simultaneous mountain spontaneously created by, you'll love this, Dan, Glorian.
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 Who's Glorian?
He was a character that was introduced in Fantastic Four who had the powers to basically grant whatever wishes and make things really good for you.
Or at least make you think
Yeah.
that. Like
my first introduction to him was an issue of Generation X where he basically did it to all of them except for Skin because there was nothing he could have given Skin.
Skin's too much of a cynic.
Yeah.
The Skin was too much of a realist about his position in life, and that kind of shit really frustrates Glorian. He's not like, I can make it so that you don't look like that. I'm comfortable with the way I look. What's wrong with the way I look?
Yeah, so it's a Fantastic Four number 34. He shows up.
Yeah, I think he's also messed around with the Hulk a fair bit.
Yep, he has.
But yeah, he's got this whole idea that he can, fix all these horror characters, and most of them realize that it's not a real fix. There's something artificial about the effect of Glorian's powers. Like, he doesn't seem to be a reality warper. It really seems to be more of super realistic illusions.
Let me see here. It says,
there seems to be a little more to it because in the Generation X one,
tachyon
the one
manipulation,
was a
it
fake.
says here.
But M was with M plate, and based on some of the things M plate says, it probably actually was M plate.
That's weird too, but that
also might have to do with him being a magic being himself, right?
I was just gonna say M plate status is being trapped in an extra dimensional pocket universe that usually, he's not the only one I've seen in a situation that he's in where you're in some weird liminal space that there's nothing you can do with it and you can't get out, but other things always seem to intersect with these little pocket prison dimensions. So that always makes for variables, always. And that's part of one of the things that makes M-Plate such a cool character is that, he will always be a big variable for the X-Men. But yeah, Glorian's whole thing doesn't really work. None of the heroes are monster heroes, hero monsters. Yeah, the monster hero is a different character. They don't really jive with it, and they reject him. And it's kind of a lame story, but it gives Marvel like Legion of Monsters. This is our title now. We'll use this a couple more times. After this, we start getting closer to the end of the 70s, into the 80s, into the Jim Shooter reign. And I might have mentioned this before, but something goes on under the Shooter's reign. I don't know if Shooter himself is responsible for it, but there seems to be a big purging of all of the horror elements.
It wasn't just a lot of the horror elements. A lot of titles around that point got purged.
Oh yeah. But when you look at like some of the stuff, like you go through my collection of horror stuff, and you see how packed it is when you go through. Like,
and then you get to the 80s and it basically crashes.
And then you got like, Ghost Rider gets canceled in 83. Prior to that, you had Tomb of Dracula and Werewolf by Night. They had, at 70 and I think 43 issues.
In fact, from what I understand of your collection is by the time you get to that point, more of the horror stuff for the next little while is actually issues of X-Men and New Mutants.
From what I have, out of like, you got Doctor Strange throughout the 80s. But as for actual like horror titles, there's a Mephisto miniseries. and it's him
Yeah, I remember,
playing.
Does he actually show
It's
up?
basically him playing Pokemon with various superhero women of the Marvel universe.
But does he
Gotta
show
catch
up in
'em
that
all.
series though?
Mephisto?
Yes.
Oh, he is the goddamn star of it.
So he finally does show up.
Goddamn star of it.
Adam, Mephisto doesn't not show up in the comics.
Yeah, dude.
Right now in the comics, there is the Council of Mephistos, where the Mephistos from all the different universes
seriously?
decide to team up together.
Yeah.
Seriously.
That's what's so silly about the whole, like, Mephisto's behind everything. He's hiding behind the scenes. Mephisto doesn't hide behind the scenes. He is an outright manipulator. If you're not going to damn yourself through your own means and he wants your soul, he is going to start fucking with you. That's what he did to the Silver Surfer.
I mean, Adam, you know about the whole one more day thing with Spider-Man, right?
Oh, God, that nonsense.
Yeah, that was
And
whole
ending the
thing,
marriage. And
yeah.
what they just revealed in the comics is that the whole reason that Mephisto did that is because Spider-Man is going to one day defeat him. But it not actually Peter and May's daughter is going to one day defeat Mephisto. So Mephisto manipulated the entire situation to make sure she was never born.
I called it.
Yeah.
I called it. Wasn't I saying right from the get-go? Okay, so the marriage is being negated. So you're going to tell me that good Catholic boy Joe Quesada is going to say, yeah, Peter and Mary Jane not only had premarital sex because they never got married, they had a baby out of wedlock. Yeah. So my immediate thought was, okay, so Mephisto's just, through Spider-Man and his desires, rewritten a good chunk of Spider-Man's history and not only taken Mayday Parker out of reality, but I'm pretty sure until they started retconning shit later on, Normie got negated too. Because Liz and Harry weren't together. Yeah, they did negate things to bring him back here, but at the start of it, like, not only did Peter and Mary Jane not get married, but Liz Osborne and Harry Osborne, they never got married.
That sucks.
So I'm like, okay, Mephisto's just got two innocent souls and nobody's the wiser. That's some messed up shit right there.
Yeah, that's why the story probably shouldn't have been told in the first place.
That Mephisto.
Yeah.
You can never trust him.
But yeah, throughout the 80s, Morbius is pretty much delegated to appearances in like She-Hulk, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four. He's just kind of here and there. Sometimes he gets cured, sometimes he's not. I think he gets hit by lightning at one point while sucking on Peter Parker's blood, and that cures him of all of his Morbius problems and stuff. Not too sure.
Because electricity solves everything.
Hey,
this is the Marvel universe, man.
Of course it does.
But
just say it was magic lightning from Thor. There you go.
Hey,
I was like half a thought behind you. I was like,
you'd be surprised how often that excuse works. I've been rereading Thunderbolts, and we get to a part where a few of the Thunderbolts under Luke Cage's command are like, I can get us out of here. When we go through Man-Thing's portal, I'm just gonna send a pulse through Thor's hammer.
Wait. Yeah, Man-Thing has portals?
Man-Thing is the guardian of the nexus of all realities.
What?
That's his role in the Marvel universe.
Yep, that is.
We gotta do Man-Thing then, because I'm freaking.
You got to learn about
Okay.
Man-Thing then.
Yeah.
No, Man-Thing's a good one. I can cover a good chunk of Man-Thing. I have many of his issues, and I've got his the first two essentials.
Right.
Actually, I'm
All
close.
right, so after do Doctor Strange, we can do Man-Thing.
Man-Thing, yeah, I'm definitely down for that one.
All right.
But getting back on track with Morbius and where he's going in life, we find him at a particular low during Todd McFarlane's ejectless Spider-Man run. The lowest of the low. I don't mean to make fun of it. I mean, there are things I like about McFarlane's Spider-Man run. Like when I say ejectiveless, it's just Spider-Man. There's no amazing, no.
I was gonna say which one it was. Because I have his Amazing Spider-Man run.
Yeah, this is the series that started in 1990.
Yeah, the one that you had like 5 or 6 different covers and stuff.
God, it was insane back those days. Well, it's still insane.
It's insane nowadays.
Oh yeah,
for some titles and stuff. Yeah, some of those Star Wars comics. But
the one that did like 50 covers.
yeah, dude, at work, I've occasionally had opportunity to price out comic books, and there's been some stuff I've looked up. I just keep scrolling through the listings, just like, oh my God, we're still on the same single issue.
Yep.
How many covers have they put out of this one Darth Vader comic? Jesus. But yeah, McFarlane's Spider-Man comic, it's got its detractors for being really poorly written, and I can't really argue against that. And I don't know that McFarlane himself could either when he's admitted to only reading the sports section of the newspaper. I don't see how you can expect to be a quality writer if
I was just
you're
about to
not
ask if he was a
buying
good writer or
in.
not.
McFarlane grows as a writer, but it's debatable about whether he ever improves as a writer. Um, Writing aside, the story he's telling in the Spider-Man stuff is pretty entertaining. You got Torment for the first 5 issues, where Craven's lover Calypso shows up to get revenge on
Calypso.
Spider-Man for killing Craven, or being responsible for Craven's death in her eyes. It's not Calypso's first appearance, but Spider-Man never met her previously, so he has no idea what's going on. He does not know who this woman is who's tormenting him. He doesn't know what her relationship is to anything. Once he starts hallucinating images of Craven the Hunter as a dead body, haunting him, he starts to kind of clue things in.
Yeah, it kind of pieces it together.
Next few issues involve the Lizard, involve the Wendigo, involve Wolverine. Wait, no, Lizard's not in those. Lizard's somewhere else. Sorry, I got that one mixed up. But again, another kind of horror-y themed story. And then we get to issues 13 and 14, where Spider-Man finds Morbius kind of lording it over a bunch of hobos living in the sewers. And it's really a sad, pathetic situation that Morbius is in. He gets his ass handed to him by Spider-Man, as what normally happens. And, well, when you kick that low, what do? But you look for a friend's couch to crash on. That takes us to his Morbius's first issue of his own comic. This is a little bit of a deep dive here, because this is part of the Rise of the Midnight Suns. Having previously mentioned Lilith, this is the Ghost Rider villain, Lilith, the Atlantean sorceress pre-Atlantean sorceress, actually. She fucked with Atlantis, but I don't think she was Atlantean. She is inspired by the Lilith of Jewish mythology, Adam's first wife in the Bible.
I didn't have a wife. What are you talking about? Sorry.
Are you claiming to be in that magnum opus that is the Bible? I wouldn't want to be in that. There's so much death and destruction, and
hey, that was my fault. I mean, his fault.
So, according to what I'm seeing here, Lilith did live in Atlantis, but it doesn't say whether she is Atlantean or not.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she predates Atlantis, just based on the things she does and just being the general mother of demons, which is, from what I understand, a role she fulfills in real mythology too. So she's been freed from her imprisonment that the Atlantean sorcerers had put her in, and the 9 are prophesized to be the ones to take her out. Ghost Rider, this kicks off right after the story arc of Danny Ketch having been killed. He got his throat torn out, and while that was happening, he transformed into Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider dealt with things, but he's experienced this vision during it. He has this vision of Lilith and the 9. He knows that they've got to gather up these other heroes. He knows John Blaze is one of them. He finds Blaze, shows him the vision. They got to find these others. Morbius is one that they recognize. So they go to, after a little bit of a detour, where Wolverine, he's got to check out Ghost Rider. You don't still have a Brood in you. We tangled the Brood in New Orleans. I'm worried about you. You're clean? All right, you go on your way. And on your way is, I believe, No, it wasn't Boston. That's where the Night Stalkers are. I forget what city they're in, but Morbius, having fled his subterranean hovel, is burning up in the sunlight and decides, "Fuck it, I'm going to my buddy's place." Crashes through the window of an old colleague of his who has this nice, lavish penthouse apartment with a beautiful sunrise view. They don't say how much it's going to cost to replace the light or the window that Morbius smashes, but they find that something's going on with Morbius and his condition may be stabilizing. So they start doing a little bit of work and research to try to figure out if they can, make this stability a bit more permanent thing. They at least get it to the point where Morbius can kind of operate and act as a human and look human and kind of suppress the bloodlust for a while. But as they're refining the serum, Lilith has one of her guys, one of the demons named Fang. They never elaborate on him because he gets killed fairly early in the overall
He's just a jobber.
Lilith story. Basically, he exists seemingly to do this one thing, which is, the idea is, okay, they're gonna fix Morbius. We want Morbius dead. If he's dead, he can't be part of the Nine. Go taint the serum with your Lilin blood. That's poison. That'll kill him. Unbeknownst,
poison.
Fang's a guy.
I knew that.
Fang, they all look like punks or monsters or something for some reason. But the tricky thing here is that not the friend that Morbius has crashed on, but another friend that Morbius is working with, an older friend of his. That friend is working himself for previous villain Dr. Payne, something to do with
Dr. Payne.
Yeah. And well, wouldn't you know it, that serum is already tainted and poisoned to begin with. So when Fang sneaks in, drops some of his blood in it, it alters the serum to an even further degree where nobody involved is going to have any idea what goes on with it. Morbius takes it, and it makes his vampiric form even more monstrous. He retains the ability to still, use the fixed serum, turn back into human for a bit, but now he's finding even more abilities. Like as time goes on, like he's got the full on ability to fly, not just like glide on drafts or whatever it was he did to begin with. And he's developing hypnotic abilities. And as his monthly series goes on, we find like he can even like distend and morph and almost turn into liquid and like T1000 his way through things. Like I wouldn't be surprised if we see some variation of that in the movies. But throughout the first issue, betrayals are discovered. It's figured out that Morbius is being poisoned. It's not for a while that they figure out exactly that he's being tainted with Lilin blood. But, at the end of that, that's where Ghost Rider gives him the penance stare. Oh, you're really a tortured soul who has guilt for every single person you've ever killed. Yeah. Okay, you're cool. You're cool.
All right, get out of here.
We trust you. We're going to call on you in a little bit for some help. But, before that happens, Spider-Man sees in the news that, body drained of blood? Morbius, I have to bring him to justice.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah. Don't think it goes so well for Spider-Man. I think it's one of those situations where, I think Dr. Payne takes Morbius and is like, yeah, torture you, get your secrets, blah, blah, blah. And Spider's like, lesser of two evils, have to save him. Typical Spider-Man moralizations and whatever. The crossover continues from there, where Ghost Rider and Blaze pick up the rest of the guys. We get the Night Stalk, so we got the Darkholders first, new characters who deal with the Book of Sins, they call it. Chithon. The book that Scarlet Witch is researching at the end of Vision and the Scarlet or WandaVision.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that is the Darkhold that she in the comics.
Like that's like the same like
all that stuff.
the same Darkhold from Agents of Shield and
Yep,
stuff.
Agents
Or?
of Shield
Yep.
and Scarlet Witch and all that.
Okay. Yeah.
It is basically the Necronomicon of the Marvel Universe, except we know exactly who authored this. One of the elder gods
Play
of the Marvel
two.
Universe. One of the last big four of the original elder gods, one of which is like Gaia, like Mother Earth, like the Earth. It's biosphere. I don't know how more grandiose you can get than that. But yeah, they're part of the 9. There's 3 of them. And then we get the Night Stalkers. They're a bunch of old school characters. We get Blade, we get Hannibal King, we get Frank Drake. Frank Drake was a member of the Drac Pack from Tomb of Dracula, along with Rachel Van Helsing and
Drac Pack.
Abraham not Whistler. I forget the old guy's name at the moment. It's been a little while since I've read. Hannibal King and Blade also showed up in Tomb of Dracula, but they weren't part of the Drac Pack. Blade would work with them. These were back in the days when Blade was perfectly sane, had a social life, had hobbies, had a girlfriend. Did you know that Blade was a jazz trumpeter? That he used to play in nightclubs? Yeah. Blade used to be a hip guy.
Play the trumpet.
Why have they not put him together with Drax?
I know, man. I want to see a jazz band in the Marvel Universe with Blade and Drax and anybody else you can drop a tune.
Is this me?
Let's get Dazzler on vocals there. I'm sure she can sing.
Drax playing the saxophone? Is it just me?
No, Drax.
Arthur Douglas is a professional saxophone player.
Oh, well, there you go. I just
one of his gigs.
That's my mind went to. I didn't even know that. I was like,
he is a saxophone player.
Oh, well, there you go.
Oh yeah. Let's get the band together, man.
Yeah, who's on drums? All right, 6 Armed Spider-Man. There you
go. No. It'd be like Slipknot, where they get like all the different Spider-Man on different percussion sets. But yeah, the story ends with the 9 assembling through a portal at the Arctic Circle and doing battle with Lilith and all of her children and defeating her. But of course, they don't do the job right, and she comes back, like a year later. But Morbius gets to continue on with his own ongoing series where he gets to experience love, life, and leather gimp suits. Yeah. No. In the first issue, he gets his new costume from, an S&M fetish store. Like, they don't really disguise it that much. Like, this is the kind of place that Clive Barker was hanging out and thinking, like, yeah, man, Cenobites. I can totally picture it. I'm going to write a book. But Morbius was, for the most part, one of the darker comics that Marvel published throughout the 90s. This stuff all pretty much hit before Vertigo was really established. Like, there was a few titles that contributed to becoming Vertigo, but they were very loosely affiliated. The idea of doing something that gravitated towards the darker audiences, the idea of doing this in the actual mainstream comics, it just wasn't done. Like, Marvel had success with like the Clive Barker stuff from Epic when they wanted to touch the older demographic as far as horror goes. But Morbius, he gets pretty close for a Comics Code approved story. There's a few crossovers with the Night Stalkers here and there. Even though Blade is going crazier throughout the duration of not just Night Stalkers, but the previous Tomb of Dracula series from the late 80s, Blade's mind snapped at the end of that story. He could not cope with the fact that Dracula was defeated, utterly defeated.
So actually, he had nothing else to do then, sort of thing.
That's one of the things that we overlooked from the 80s is a major event that happened in Doctor Strange in the early 80s was the the casting of the Montesi formula, named after the monk who discovered it. The Darkhold has a counter spell for every single spell that the Book of the Vishanti holds.
The Vishanti.
It was the Book of the Vishanti that was used to create vampires back in Atlantis in the Marvel Universe. So, following that logic, if it was spells from the Book of the Vishanti, not necessarily the Vishanti themselves, but it was a spell from their book that caused this, there should be a counter spell in the Darkhold. Well, there was, and Dracula figured this out, made great effort to thwart Doctor Strange. But with the help of the Night Stalkers, before they really became the Night Stalkers, back when they were just borderline investigations, a loosely affiliated group of private investigators, they successfully cast the Montesi formula, and they wiped vampires out of existence. Following that, the only traces of vampirism left were the pseudo-vampire Michael Morbius, because he was not created through any spells, any mystical infection or anything. He had
created himself.
The spell didn't touch him at all. The Night Stalker Hannibal King was a vampire, but had never ever drunk human blood. He had never taken a victim up to that point.
Oh, is that Ryan Reynolds in the third one?
Ryan Reynolds' character in the third one.
Ryan Reynolds in the third one.
Except his character really seems more like Frank Drake.
He does,
than Hannibal King.
Yeah, so I was wondering why that name sounded familiar. Took me a second.
There's a few weird things going on in that Blade movie. More than a few weird things. But because he's never taken a victim, that plus Doctor Strange's surgical skill was able to save him. He survived without any trace of the vampire taint. And the third one was eventually the flaw that broke the spell years later. Doctor Strange had a skeleton in his closet. His younger brother Victor had been infected with vampirism some years prior, and when Strange couldn't directly cure him, he placed him in suspended animation. And Victor Strange was still in suspended animation when the Montesi formula was cast, and was therefore spared its effects. So before Morbius's fall into the sewers, he got caught up with the scheming to bring vampires back into existence. The voodoo sorceress Marie Laveau, based on the legendary real life Marie Laveau. In the comics, she had attained immortality through creating a serum from vampire blood. Every few years, she would have to create a new dose, take it, and that would retain her youth. It's coming time for her to make a new dose, and there are no vampires anywhere. She thought she might be able to use Morbius to do this thing, but as a science vampire, he's real fascinating and real neat stuff, but his blood is useless for her purposes. So she starts conspiring to try to bring back Dracula if she can. She finds out about Victor Strange, starts using him, manipulating him, and the end result, when all is said and done, is that Brother Voodoo's manservant sacrifices himself to try to keep the Lord of the Vampires from being resurrected, but just ends up becoming the vessel. And it's not Dracula that gets resurrected, it's Varney, the original Lord of the Vampires from Atlantis, the one who was responsible for manipulating Dracula into becoming the Lord of the Vampires that he was. After 10,000 years of being Lord of the Vampires, Varney was just kind of sick of existence, set things up to ensure that Dracula would not only become a vampire, but have all the proper motivations to become Lord of the Vampires. And then specific. Once Dracula passes all these tests, there's the story presented in Dracula Lives from Dracula's perspective, and then there's the story from Bizarre Adventures number crap, I can't remember what number, 20 something. It's a really it the cover looks awful because it's like a Fumetti type cover where you've got some guy dressed up as Dracula with some buxom victim in his arms, and it's really kind of a cheap looking cover. And I could see how so many comic book readers back in the day would have just turned their nose up at that issue. But man, that issue's full of gold. The Varney story is one of the few Totleben and Bissett stories in Marvel, the creative art team from Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run. Beautiful stuff.
Such a good run.
I'm not a huge DC fan, but oh man, Saga the Swamp Thing.
Oh fuck yeah! Then an enemy lesson. I think we talked about this once before, but I was such good. Like yesterday. Oh, so good.
Oh yeah. We'll touch up on Swamp Thing a bit when we talk about Man Thing.
Because there's a
fair bit of relevance.
There's a whole thing there. Yeah. We'll get into that later.
But yeah, Morbius got tied up in the whole resurrection of the vampires thing. Was witness to Varney coming back, and the only thing that saved him was the fact that Varney did not want to be resurrected and was a little bit blasé about what was going on. Like, he didn't really care too much about, like, oh, my enemies, kill my enemies, blah, blah, blah. Nah. Smack everybody around a bit, take off, find myself, go on a little bit of a fact-finding journey.
Take off, eh?
Find where I fit in this new world. It's been like 500 years. There's a little bit of catching up to get to. But not at least at that point, Morbius, he knew Doctor Strange, he get a little bit more ingrained into the superhero community that he becomes part of in the years to come. Because after, as we get through his monthly series, we get him tying up with the Night Stalkers again, back to Blade, even though he's crazy with, just not being right. When they needed him back in the 80s, even though vampires weren't around, Doctor Strange kind of had to do some brain trickery to him. And then in the first issue of Night Stalkers, he has to make it worse by like, okay, well, Blade is obsessed with vampires. We need him, but we can't have this single-minded obsession. All right, I'm going to mess with your brain a little bit. And least your obsession is diffused among just hating everything supernatural. This will backfire because Blade's condition deteriorates till we get to the Midnight Massacre.
An awesome crossover.
This one is something special. During the lead up with the Night Stalkers investigations, they learn about, Blade learns about a spell from the Darkhold. During this time, the Darkhold spells have been showing up randomly, being delivered by this mysterious dwarf. And the people who have been receiving them without having any knowledge about how to read these pages are just instinctively able to read them. Some wishes granted, their soul is taken, and bad shit happens. So Blade learns about this one Darkhold spell that will wipe out the supernatural. Okay, cool. This is my bag. He tries to hide it from the other Night Stalkers, but there's backups to logs and stuff. They're hot on his trail. They're like, okay, Blade is just too far off the rails. He gets the spell, he reads it, he accepts the offer, and everybody is still standing. There's a little bit of shock and confusion. Like, I thought this was supposed to just wipe out everything supernatural. And Blade just smiles. It's not about wiping it all out at once. It's about hunting it down piece by piece. And he just starts slaughtering anything supernatural he can get his hands on and absorbing their powers. This is a bit of a turning point for Morbius in his monthly series, because we know from issue 1 that he got infected with Lilin blood, and there's implications that this may have had some other effect on him besides the power enhancement. Well, during
Such as
well, psychologically speaking, once we get to the Midnight Massacre,
yeah.
at this point, an old friend of his and an old topic of discussion that we've mentioned before, Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night.
Wolf by night.
He's had some time previous to this. He's shown up in Spider Woman. He's shown up in West Coast Avengers. His experiences have allowed him to get a complete hold on who he is, psychologically speaking. He has complete control over himself as both the human and the werewolf. There's no him and the wolf. They are one synchronous individual. He has complete control over his transformation. He doesn't even freak out during a full moon. So he's been hearing that Morbius might not be in the best place, mentally speaking. So he shows up to try to give his friend some help. He doesn't show up in time. Morbius has tangled with Blade, and Morbius has taken a hit. And Morbius seems to be dead. This is confusing because up to this point, there was no indication that Morbius had any supernatural linkage whatsoever. So the fact that Blade, now known as Switchblade, has just run him through and drained him of his powers, this is a game changer. Further game changer is when Morbius opens his eyes back up, and it's not Morbius in the driver's seat. It is the Lilin presence that has grown in him through the infected blood. This presence has a complete control over the Lilin abilities. Like, it just oozes and slurps around, kind of like the Venom symbiote would when it doesn't have a host. And it shows up when Switchblade finally has Jack Russell in his hands. And prior to this, he's killed and absorbed Demogoblin's powers, so he's generating like pumpkin bombs, and he's generating bat daggers and bat throwing blades and stuff. He's got a pumpkin bomb jammed down Jack Russell's throat, and Morbius is just watching while this tiny little presence in his brain is screaming that that's his friend, and he can't just watch his friend, and boom, Jack Russell's head blows up. And well, Morbius attacks again, and this time the Lilin presence in charge, they both die. And one more for Switchblade's kill count. The 5-issue miniseries runs from Night Stalkers 10, Ghost Rider 40, Darkhold 11, Morbius 12, climaxing with Ghost Rider and Blaze Spirits of Vengeance 13. One of the members of the Darkhold Redeemers ends up casting a counterspell to reverse the effects of the Switchblade, but she sacrifices her own soul in doing so and opens the door for a couple of other potentially worse things to happen down the line. And she kind of knows it and starts getting kind of really depressed afterwards. But that's the Darkstalker's problem. That's not Morbius's problem. Morbius's problem comes from the fact that upon being resurrected and having a little bit more awareness of what's going on in his head, he starts to get a bit more conflicted. The Lilin, not the presence in his head, but the Lilin, the race of demons. One of the things they do to further try to entrench Morbius into their side of things is they bring Maritime Bancroft, Morbius's girlfriend, back from the dead. She had been killed in Morbius #1, not through Morbius's hand. She was outright murdered by a different character. But a Lilin called Parasite ends up using her body as a host, and they start trying to manipulate Morbius to be more like them through using her. It doesn't end out too badly for him, because later on the Parasite presence is driven out of Martine, and they're actually able to kind of resuscitate her. And she ends up being not a vampire, but some new form of undead. And again, like with Morbius, they start to kind of question, okay, where do your loyalties lie? The next big adventure is the Siege of Darkness. This, at the time, was somewhat controversial because it is 17 freaking parts long. Back in the early 90s, an advertised 17-part crossover.
Oh,
That's huge.
yeah.
I mean, you compare it to some of the stuff that Marvel's done over the last 10 to 15 years.
Avengers vs. X-Men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah. Like, I look at this and I'm thinking, like, God, that crappy Curse of the Mutants crossover was at least this size, if not bigger itself. But Night Stalkers was, or not Night Stalkers, Siege of Darkness was a pretty good crossover. Lilith rises up again. She had risen up previously in a Ghost Rider story, Road to Vengeance: The Missing Link. She started that teaming up with an old Johnny Blaze villain, Centurius. Not the same African American super scientist villain that showed up in Thunderbolts. This is, I think this Centurius is some form of Native American. I think like Mayan or Aztec or something potentially. He's really old, ancient human kind of thing. Got sorceress abilities. He teams up with Lilith for world domination type crap, but that story ends with the revelation that Zarathos, the demon that inhabited the original Ghost Rider and caused Johnny Blaze to kind of go evil towards the end of that run. He's been hiding inside Centurius the whole time. And Lilith is like, all right, I know when to hitch my wagon to a new horse. She kicks Centurius to the curb. He's like, oh, Zarathos, you bad boy, what you doing tonight? And they go for their own brand of world domination, with Lilith using her children to spread this black mist, starting from Cypress Hill Cemetery, working their way outwards. The Midnight Suns, the Nine, them and their allies are among the few that stand against this mist. But because Morbius is infected with this Lilin presence in his head, he ends up not being one that they can trust. He betrays them a couple times, outright murders one of the other characters, not through his own volition. Like, it is the Lilin presence in his head causing all this. And eventually his allies find out that, okay, no, he is being controlled against his will. Can't really hate him for that. No, Blade, you sit down. Not the time for it. But by the end of it, Lilith is banished. Morbius is a little bit more freed from Lilin control. Gets to kind of go back to his own life. At a certain point, the Lilin presence is physically purged from his body and becomes a creature in its own right, a villain known as Bloodthirst. But this does have the effect of removing a number of the advanced abilities that Morbius had, like the body morphic distension shit. Like, yeah, that's all gone. Moving on, his series does actually last for a surprising amount of time for a early to mid 90s spin-off. He runs like 30 issues. Like, nothing else from the Rise of the Midnight Suns crossover makes it that long. Like, Spirits of Vengeance is the next longest at like 20 something issues. Yeah, Spirits of Vengeance only makes it 23 issues. Night Stalkers barely makes it 20. Darkhold only makes it up to Siege of Darkness. Issue 16 is the last issue of that, and it ends with Siege. But Morbius keeps trucking along past all these the crossover type stuff. The negative backlash to the size of Siege of Darkness led to editorial kind of abandoning crossovers within the Ghost Rider family of stories. There's really not a whole lot of back and forth between stuff outside of Ghost Rider and Blaze's story. But yeah, Morbius, I don't have the last issue, but makes it all the way up to at least issue 30. The creative team does kind of change up a fair bit here and there. Reading about it on Wikipedia, there was some conflict between the original two members of the creative team for that title. Len Kaminsky, who he wrote Ghost Rider 2099, didn't he?
Len Kaminsky?
Yeah. Do you recall, Dan? I'm pretty sure he was Ghost Rider.
I believe so. It
you
sounds
think of
like
anything
that
else
to me.
he was writing?
Let's take a look.
I remember enjoying his stuff, but yeah, he and artist Ron Wagner did not necessarily see eye to eye on how to tell the stories. Basically, I think the artist wanted more action, and the writer was trying to do something a little bit more Alan Moore-ish.
Yeah, it was Len Kaminsky, but he doesn't have a Wikipedia page, so it's not like I can just look up what else he's done.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised there. Well, I'm sure there is a page. I'm just not too surprised that there's no link listed.
No, it's a Reddit out link, which means it was a page that got deleted.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's usually what it does when it's like that. So that brings us up to what, about the mid-90s or so?
Mid-90s there, where things start to fizzle out because we start getting closer to the bankruptcy, where, you know, they're less willing to just keep throwing shit at the wall. 32. Yeah, doesn't seem, as far as what I've got here in the horror stuff, there's not much. But I seem to recall there's a few Spider-Man appearances he has from there on out.
Well, and it seems to be like, from what I've read of a lot of appearances after that point, it seems to be a lot of those, a writer would pick him up and he'd be a bad guy again, and then he'd be a good guy again, and he'd be a bad guy again. And
yeah, he's another one of those characters that doesn't always get the most consistency, because you get different writers that are like, "Whoa, I remember this classic Spider-Man villain," with no real regard for, what growth or development the character has undergone in the meanwhile. I seem to recall having some late 90s Peter Parker. Yeah. Early 97 Peter Parker Spider-Man.
Wait, Peter Parker Spider-Man?
This is the formerly adjectiveless Spider-Man title. So adjectiveless is now Peter Parker Spider-Man. Yeah, Morbius is showing up as a Spider-Man villain there. It's been a while since I've read these issues, and I don't seem to recall there being anything particularly revelatory in them. Usual, like, "Oh no, Morbius, you're a bad guy. I can't trust you. Oh, there's a bigger bad guy to deal with, a greater threat. Oh, okay, I guess you're all right for now, Morbius." That kind of crap. Moving ahead through the Spider-Man, I don't think I got too much myself.
I think after that, there's not a lot. I think the next big thing that really is there would be the Marvel Zombie stuff.
Not quite. There was a little bit of his
the Supreme Registration stuff around
Civil War, because he registered, and part of his requirements for registering was that he had to help the government with their plot to bring Blade in. So he's like, "Oh, all right. You're going to help me with my problem, and all I got to do is help trick Blade into this facility here with all these SHIELD guys?" Done. Like, that's kind of a no-brainer. And
why not?
What else did he do? I guess that was part of what brought him into the Marvel Zombie stuff. Because
he was like working for SHIELD or something after that, right?
Armor. He was working with Armor, because they were the ones dealing with the alternate reality threats. There's the zombie stuff. We got a few boxes sitting here. Oh no, that's too far. There we go. Marvel Zombies 3. So Marvel Zombies 3 is where the Marvel Zombies virus hits the 616 universe. Previous stories had all been set in different realities. And even in those stories, the zombie virus had come from outside of those realities, brought by a zombified version of the Sentry who had decimated, if not just his own previous universes prior to that. Like, we don't know necessarily how many he had been responsible for having devoured. But when it came to the Marvel or the 616 universe, home team advantage. Our guys are just going to win. That's just how it is. But one of the
re-roll in the 616.
Yeah. But one of the things going on in Marvel Zombies 3 is that zombie version of Morbius has already infiltrated armor, is using latex makeup to hide the fact that he is a zombie, and has the real Morbius like hidden in his quarters in like a medically induced coma, so like he can keep drawing blood off of him to sustain his own facade. Yeah.
Eventually, when all that ends, the real Morbius kills the zombie.
Oh, he is pissed.
Yeah.
When he gets out of it, he is real pissed to the point
As you
where
are.
he's like, I'm getting the band back together. And they're like, next series, Midnight Suns. And the next series looks like
Jennifer Kale, Hellstrom,
yeah, Jennifer Kale,
Jack Russell, and Man-Thing.
Yeah. None of them besides Morbius were Midnight Suns previously. Jack Russell was an adjunct to them, like he hung out with Morbius during that time, but
he was an associate. Yeah.
I'm not even sure if he even made it into like a Midnight Suns Unlimited issue. Like even the Legion of Night had a story in there. But yeah, Morbius puts together a group of Midnight Suns to deal with any possible remains of the zombie plague in the 616 universe. There's some shenanigans going down. The Hood tries to get involved with buying said zombie virus. Dormammu tries to be Dormammu.
As he's one to do.
Yeah, he preys on Jennifer Kale's fears of getting eaten by a zombie and tries to possess her. Doesn't go so well. But following that, well, when we follow what's actually going on in the Marvel Universe, we know after Civil War and all the registration stuff, Norman Osborn got put in charge of the Thunderbolts. He ran them pretty successfully till we got to Secret Invasion. Because he was running the Thunderbolts, they operated on a mix of Stark Tech and Oscorp Tech. So not all of their systems went down. And because of their security protocols, they didn't get infiltrated by any Skrull sleeper agents. Thunderbolts were in a position to be a major force for good during the Secret Invasion. But this also meant that Norman was on the front lines during the final charge. Norman was seen as the lead force in defending Earth and kicking the Skrulls off of the planet. And as a result, he got put in charge of national security and replaced S.H.I.E.L.D. with Hammer. At this point, Morbius falls out of grace with the government, probably because, well, very few people want to work for Norman Osborn. Not a whole lot of the Thunderbolts did in the first place.
And I assume that Justin Hammer has nothing to do with that?
Nothing to do with that. Hammer, Osborn's explanation was he wanted to send a different message than S.H.I.E.L.D. Hammer was much more
essentially
totalitarian.
S.H.I.E.L.D. It was just like the evil.
They were the Nazi version of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah.
That's all you have to say. Like, it was Norman Osborn with his own like fascist army. Like that was spelled out in the comics. But one of the fun things that happened then was Norman Osborn put together a list of everybody that had offended him and he wanted them dealt with. One of the things he had dealt with was the Punisher. He sicked Daken, the son of Wolverine, onto the Punisher. You know, he had his analysts look at things like, okay, we figure out of all the guys you can rely on, this guy's got the best chance of being able to do the deed. And oh, Daken does the deed. He chops Punisher up into itty bitty pieces and flushes him down the sewers. And before the Hammer Goons can retrieve all those juicy body parts, Well, there's Man-Thing covering the retreat of a whole flock of mole men who are running away with Frank Castle's parts. What the hell's going on here? And Man-Thing makes sure that
Oh,
the
is this
Hammer
a
guys.
freaking castle?
Yep.
This is Frankencastle. They bring those parts to Morbius. Morbius stitches them back together along with parts from some form of a Cadillac, maybe several Cadillacs. And then we have got a gigantic, pissed off. I can't think of anything to go beyond pissed off. A giant, monstrous version of Frank Castle. Because he is still healing, he is kind of beholden to the monsters. Like I said before, they're hiding out in the former Morlock tunnels. Hammer does not approve. Well, Osborn does not approve of. Osborn's a man of science, magic, and monsters and the supernatural. They're not his deal. He is not going to tolerate that kind of shit. So he is being pretty oppressive to the monsters, and the monsters need. If it was just monster muscle power, they wouldn't have a problem. They need a soldier, they need a tactician, they need a warrior. Morbius knows exactly who they need. So Morbius has the unenviable task of having put the Punisher back together, making sure he doesn't fall apart before he gets himself blown apart. I mean, the number of times he has to deal with the Punisher being injured or damaged or just fucked up again. Eventually, he resorts to putting a bloodstone in Frankencastle. It's like, okay, that's it. There's no way he's going to live unless I do this. This is a bad idea. You don't have to tell me this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea, but it's done. And it was a bad idea, but from an editorial standpoint, it was a good idea because it allowed them to de-age Frank Castle to a point where he can still be a Vietnam veteran, but now like he had the blood gem for so long and healed so much that he's basically a guy in his 40s again. Morbius, he was one of the main supporting characters in it. There was a fairly large crew of monsters involved in that run. The Amphibian, he was one of them. I think Jack Russell was, Jack Russell was one of them. And I think Nikantu, the Living Mummy, was another one as well. As a result of that, Morbius was not involved in Marvel Zombies 5. That was Howard the Duck and Machine Man's time to shine. That was good fun. Unfortunately, from here on out with Morbius, it's mostly
shows up in Spider-Man for the most
yeah.
part.
Well, the stuff with Spider-Man is at least classic Morbius.
Yeah.
The Marvel Now era gave us the Marvel equivalent of Lobo from the New 52. So if you remember that crappy Lobo being the stupid teeny emo one, that's basically what the Marvel Now Morbius was. It was still Morbius, same character, same history, but all the fans who followed Morbius' history were like, this isn't going to be some Twilight ripoff emo, oh, woe is me, being a vampire sucks kind of mopey crap. Oh, no, it's not going to be that at all. And it's exactly what it was. I pride myself on the fact that I am a completionist in the sense that if I start reading something, I want to give it a chance to the finish. Like, even if I'm not enjoying it, I want to see how things conclude. I dropped that Morbius comic. It just sucked, and it wasn't going anywhere. He was, again, living in the streets, hanging out with street people that, he wants to help, but he doesn't want to help because he's got to remain detached. There's way too many analogies with, drug addiction and the sort of mental problems that can come with heavy drug use. It was preachy and heavy-handed, and it didn't do anything. Like, there really was no point to the comic. It was a waste of paper. I have no need to go back and reassess it. Like,
No, thank you.
And I think I read the most recent story that he appeared in.
What happens there?
Currently, so actually, it was the current Spider-Man arc that's going on, where they've done the whole Ben Riley has taken over as Spider-Man, working for the Beyond Corporation.
yeah, I saw something about that.
Yeah, Beyond's been doing a lot
Ben
of.
Riley's back.
Yep.
Nice.
He's been
Beyond
back for a little while
Corporation's
now.
Oh yeah.
doing a lot of little sort of stuff in the background and causing all sorts of weird things. And well, I mean, it turns out they had Morbius and they used Morbius's blood and I think the lizards to make a Morbius lizard monster, which Morbius, Misty Knight, and Colleen Wing had to go take out. Morbius took it out by letting it bite him, and then it blew up.
Yeah, apparently he was part of Spider Island as well.
Yeah, but I mean, that used a lot of Spider-Man characters, right?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that he was the mysterious number 6.
Ooh, mysterious number 6.
Did he escape the island?
Well, they didn't know that he was Spider-Man.
Spider.
Or no, sorry, they didn't know that he was Morbius.
Ah.
When Peter Parker tried to investigate the identity of number 6. So that implies that he didn't know. I really think that Peter Parker would be both the best boss to work for and the worst boss to work for.
Yeah, he'd let you get away with whatever you want and give you like all the time off you'd need, but at the same time, he would be completely unreliable. And I imagine half the time you wouldn't get paid because he'd forget.
You'd have to have somebody really trustworthy running payroll.
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, I haven't heard any grumblings right now about any possibilities that Marvel's going to capitalize off of the Morbius movie.
Well, by now we would have
anything.
heard.
I mean, the movie's been in the can for like 2 years, so I'm betting that any real plans were discussed and dropped like 2 years ago.
How do you mean? In which respect?
Well, like, if they were going to release a comic book alongside the movie, like they do, that like 2 years ago, they probably would have maybe planned something, but since the movie got delayed so much, they may have just, kind of dropped whatever plans they had.
Right. Gotcha.
Marvel's got vaults full of inventory stories that they've paid for that just haven't seen the light of day. So, like, it's not. I mean, one that comes to mind right now is a few years ago, Tim Seeley was tapped to do a new Blade series that followed a daughter of Blade, and like Blade is in his 90s now. Blade is almost 100 years old in the comics now. So the fact that he would have illegitimate offspring scattered around the world, like it's about as even odds as Wolverine having illegitimate offspring around the world.
And we know he's got lots of them.
Yeah. So the idea would that there would be this female teenage daughter of Blade, kind of Marvel's answer to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But it then never came out and never came out and never came out. And then Tim Seeley revealed that, yeah, there was some question about, him being a white male writing a black teenage girl. Here I was like, okay, so the guy who, gave us Hack Slash is going to basically do the same sort of thing for Marvel. And people have a problem with this because, well, that's so very, very sad. But yeah, that's an example of something that Marvel has presumably a couple of issues of in the vault. In the vault, probably never see the light of day.
That sucks.
Yeah, they're like, because Marvel, aside from stuff like that, Marvel will also commission inventory stories, stuff to fill the gap if the regular story misses a publication date. So say you've got Spider-Man and, you've got this story building up month after month, but the writer or the artist has gotten burnt out and they're not going to have the material ready for the deadline. So you either go with the dreaded deadline doom and provide a reprint because you, the reader, demanded it, which isn't always accurate, or they go with an inventory story. They have some other creative team at some point during production, like, okay, we want a couple of issues in the can just in case. You take this script, this one-off story here, you guys do this one here. and then they'll take one of those ones off. Okay, here, this one doesn't interfere with continuity whatsoever. We'll just slap that in here. Spider-Man goes off, he fights the Rhino, and there, we've had a nice little interlude, back on track for next week. But then they end up having, an assortment of these filler issues that they don't end up needing from time to time.
Nice.
And for a while there, they kind of stopped doing that altogether, and then Marvel got back into it with their 0.1 issues or things like that, right? Because for a good long while there in the early 2000s, if something was delayed, it was delayed. There was no fill-in; it was just delayed.
Yeah, it depended sometimes on the title, like bringing back up Thunderbolts, Warren Ellis's run. That was a heavily hyped series. That's what got me reading Thunderbolts on my pull list at that point. And it was subject to delays. And they didn't want to lose the momentum on that series. So that's where they had a bunch of one-shots expanding upon various plot threads that Warren Ellis probably would have dealt with in his own time, but, they don't need to be part of his. They can just be put in there like, okay, this is now put out there for the reader to see. We can touch up on that later on.
Or as other writers have said, you only get 22 pages a month, so you do what you can, and some things you don't.
Yeah. Well, that's a different matter for debate when you compare decompressed storytelling that we get nowadays to comics from, years past. Like when I'm sitting and reading comics on my break, if I take something like from the 70s up to even the 90s, a 10-minute break will usually, like 10 minutes of my break will usually take up an entire comic. But then as I get like towards like the 2000s and later, like sometimes I can get through 2 or 3 comics in a 15-minute break because there's just so little story in between those pages. It's been spread across so many issues just because they're telling stories for the trade and not for the issue. If you know what I mean there.
So there's fill in space.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. So yeah, so that is Morbius, the living vampire.
There's not really much else to go on because we kind of got all the way up to, nowadays, right?
All right, and then I'll be able to go see the movie tomorrow and see if any of this is brought up at all. But go ahead.
Like I said, his origin as it is has nothing to do with Spider-Man. So making his story like doing his own solo movie first, that one actually makes sense. It's not like taking Venom and having to figure out like, okay, how do we transpose this out of Spider-Man and make it its own thing?
Yeah,
we can follow the cartoon or what do we do? I think making Venom its own thing independent of Spider-Man had too much opportunity for failure. I don't see the same problems with Morbius. I think Morbius's problems are unique to itself. I personally have no problem with Jared Leto. I think he's a fine choice for Morbius. I don't necessarily think that his supposed method acting sensibilities would necessarily get in the way of something like a Morbius character. And it's an anti-hero vampire movie. I mean, there's not a whole lot you can do to elevate it above what's already been done, but you're gonna have to do something bad to screw it up. So let's see what happens.
Well, it is Sony. I mean,
Sony doing their own thing. Yeah.
All right. So do we think that Matt Smith character is how they do? Do we know if that's like from the comics or if it's his own?
From what I understand, he
originally was, but they rewrote him to be somebody else.
Yeah, from what I saw, Matt Smith, he's playing Milo Morbius.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, there is no Milo Morbius in the comics.
Oh, so they're related somehow, or?
It seems to be.
It says here that it is his surrogate brother.
So like,
the hell does that mean?
Morbius' surrogate brother, a rich man
Adopted
originally
brother.
named. Just let me finish. It says Morbius' surrogate brother, a rich man originally named Lucian, who suffers from the same rare blood disease as Morbius.
Oh, so it's the sort of thing like, I'm just like you. We're buddies. We're brothers.
Apparently, he was originally announced he was going to be playing Hunger.
Hunger.
I'm not familiar with Hunger.
He's a Spider-Man villain by the looks of it here, created by Howard Mackie in issue 76 of the Objective List series.
Wait a minute. Don't I have that? Yeah, that's that's actually part of a series that includes Morbius.
Well, because I mean, what's why they'd be using him, right? I'm guess assuming he's a villain, a Morbius villain, and it sees here that he is a vampire.
See this guy dressed in black. Oh, these were kind of dense issues back in the day.
I think Marrow even shows up around that point and teams up Spider-Man.
Morrow didn't get enough credit.
Still,
yeah, I don't see him, but I'll have to just actually look through the issue more thoroughly.
All right, so then once we do the next episode, I'll tell everybody what I thought of the movie, because I'll be seeing it tomorrow. So yeah. All right. So all right. So all right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this week, and yeah, I think actually, where am I going with this? I don't know. Look for us on Twitter at the Marvel Pod or Instagram at the Multiverse of Marvel, and then just listen to us wherever you get a podcast. And until next time, read some comics, folks.